Which leads me on to the great inner battle. Within the monster is the victim of its own monstrosity. The victim is the helpless and innocent person deep within that's often referred to as the inner child, this part of the self that cannot make sense of and feels somewhat disturbed by the brash and belligerent behaviours that we uncontrollably engage with. We can have these conflicted desires to be naughty and nice, this internal struggle between wanting to be good versus can't help being bad. When you're in a battle of good versus bad reaches epic polarization, one is likely to become the bipolar casualty of a Jekyll and Hyde complex, where the mind is caught within the battle of extreme personalities. On a good day, one can behave with decency and constraint like Dr. Jekyll, coming across to people as someone that's got their game together. However, when the stimulus of a bad moon is rising, that's when all hell breaks loose. That's when the monstrous traits of Mr. Hyde can grow in presence as we spiral off into a tangent, a tirade, a weird escapade, or an animalistic rampage to fulfill one's lustful desires, where the altered beast howls and growls with delightful rage. And we all know what it's like to bounce up and down in temperament and mood, to be either placid or supercharged with feistiness or venom. But whenever there is an intense high, there is soon to follow the equally intense low. When coming down from the higher wire, we all shrink back down in size to the fallible human. When recounting how we went off like a grenade and momentarily lost self-control, we can feel tormented by the wounds of shame, guilt and sorrow for all of the bad ways that we've caused harm to others and compromised ourselves. Now, I know this part of the presentation has been pretty dark, but we need to shed light on that which has been hidden in the dark. Only by exposing the dark traits of who we are, and we all have dark traits, can we do what's necessary to expunge them from our psychology. And still we are about to go even deeper into the underlying psychology of the devious dozen. Now we're going to explore what I term as the unresolved void. I begin this with a statement. Inferiority equals unworthiness. And we will soon get to the reason why that statement is a truism. Because the devious dozen are negative aspects of our character that stem from the underlying inferiorities that are related to our past experiences. These underlying inferiorities are the unresolved fears, insecurities, traumas and shames that we have associated to our past life experiences. These unresolved experiences are the root cause of our self-sabotaging and self-abusive behaviours. We harm ourselves and limit our potential because we have underlying traits that are fearful, insecure, traumatized and shameful. And we carry that negative baggage around with us, which impedes us from being and doing better. So let me ask you, where do you have inferiorities? Have you ever been honest with yourself in finding out where you are inferior? Have you ever been vulnerable to others and disclosed your most sensitive and intimate parts of self? Do you actually know what it feels like to be free of the mental burden that you carry within? Because as they say, you are only as sick as your secrets. And some of our secrets are our deepest shames, deepest fears, insecurities and traumas. You see, the inferiorities that we have, these shadow aspects of self, they become this empty and dark void within. They become this hidden state of unworthiness where one does not feel worthy enough without having and doing something external to feel worthy and validated. That empty and dark void that is deep within must always be balanced with an external value. And there is this constant yearning for an experience, for someone to come along or to have something to compensate for that innate lack, that sense of, I can't be happy without that thing. And the devious dozen are the characteristic traits that service that desire to have externals. The externals of pleasure, comfort, rewards, possessions, and validations. Except for, these are superficial values that only temporarily soothe the void of not being enough. The void is the result of the undeveloped person within that can only be fulfilled with values that affirms true nature, which is the acquirement and development of knowledge and skills that are aligned with one's innate potential. When one is not aligned with a life that correlates to one's true nature, one is in a perpetual state of discontentment. The discontentment shows up in one's life as loneliness, misery, yearning, disappointment, and dissatisfaction, with the thoughts and feelings that something is always wrong, missing, or never good enough. And when the pangs of being unfulfilled are intense and frequent, this is when instant gratification becomes a prevalent theme in one's life. To escape the discomforting thoughts and feelings of what's wrong, what's missing, and what's not good enough, we tend to alleviate the way we feel with pleasurable stimulants and soothers, which pacify and distract the mind from the pains of life and the void of emptiness and discontent within. Yet, those external measures are temporary and they don't resolve the internal issues. The instant gratifications that stimulate and soothe become compulsive addictions. We are addicted to what we need to feel pacified and pepped up, and yet we can't stop. And it is the devious dozen, the 12 archetypes, that are driving us with desires to get those feel-good experiences that are making us feel better in the moment. Yet again, the comfort and pleasure of instant gratification is fleeting. Once the feel-good sensations are over, we always subside back down into that void of feeling negative, agitated, and discontent. When instant gratification has become habitual, we then start to experience distant karma. Distant karma is the delayed negative consequences of our actions today. Distant karma is not so obvious. When inflamed with compulsive desires to be, have, and do that which is pleasurable, there is no consideration for the long-term effects, for one only has eyes on the immediate prize. When being driven by the desires of the devious dozen archetypes, we are unconscious with actions, and therefore we are without reflection. Reflection is the ability and willingness to look back at our actions and take an honest review of where we think we went wrong or right. Without reflection, we are unable to recognize and realize the consequences of our actions. There is no connecting the dots looking back. There is no, when I did this, this happened. Therefore, without reflection, there can never be hindsight. Hindsight is the understanding of how a situation or event happened and developed, and therefore knowing what we can do next time in a similar situation to ensure a better result. However, without hindsight, there is no recognizing patterns of behavior, and therefore no foresight, no predicting the dots looking forward. And if we can't put together the simple equation of when I do this, this happens, then we continue forth without wisdom and prudence, making the same poor decisions that inevitably lead to the same negative consequences. So, whenever there is instant gratification in your life, wherever you are pleasing yourself and not healing and helping yourself, wherever you are experiencing the negative consequences of your action, there is a lack of reflection. But ultimately, there is a lack of self-care, self-worth, and self-respect in this part of your life. But why? Why can we be so negligent in certain areas of our life? Why do we keep burning ourselves like a moth to the flame? Why can't we seem to break the patterns of not being able to get enough satisfaction? That's because we are caught within this punishment and reward cycle, where the mind-body is conditioned to seek a pleasurable reward after experiences that are punishing with pain. That's because, and as you will learn later in this program, that wherever there is pain in your life, be it emotional, mental, physical, social, relational, financial, or spiritual, there is always some type of compensatory pleasure to alleviate yourself with. For every punishing life experience that you have, there is comforting reward that surely follows. And if you take a closer look at your daily or weekly patterns, you will see this to be true. However, going from pain to a reward is a self-perpetuating cycle that leads downwards to a pathway of diminishing returns. That's because we soon become familiarized and desensitized to the uplifting effects of our rewards, where the rewards become less pleasurable, which leads to one needing more and more rewards in the attempt to transcend the way one feels. The problem is those rewards can be toxic in nature, costly and overbearing on one's lifestyle, to a point that it becomes a hassle, a chore, this constant need to maintain one's pleasurable rewards and comforts, which in of themselves can become this punishing routine of needing to keep up with all of the things that one needs to do to feel satisfied in their life. Just ask anyone that is addicted to alcohol, drugs, shopping or junk food. There's a lot of time, effort, prepping, organising, money, doing and consuming, a lot of work that goes into maintaining that addiction. And it is the Devious dozen, the 12 archetypes with their drives and desires, that are the psychological cause of why we have this double-bind relationship to pleasure and pain, where we are bound to a cycle of punishment and reward. Also, they can be the reason we have this push and pull relationship with reality, where we can flip between loving and hating the same thing at the same time, or be turned off and then turned on by the same thing at different times. Devious dozen archetypes can be the reason that we develop this yo-yo psychology and recycle back and forth between usual patterns of behaviour, where in different aspects of our life we are snagged within these related cycles of entrapment and escapism, punishment and reward, pain and pleasure. And the reason that I keep mentioning these cycles is because I want to drive home the point that whilst you continually cycle between these different drives and desires, you will never make real progress in your life. So whether these drives and desires be connected to your health, your purpose, your relationships, your money, or any other aspect of your life, unless you break those cycles, you will continue to go around with the same lifestyle patterns. And yes, the environments, the situations, and the people may change in your life, and yet you will continue to cultivate the same cycles and patterns with them. When stuck in cycles and patterns, we can also develop an all or nothing mentality. What does that actually mean? Well, it could mean that we think, if I can't have it all, then I won't have nothing. It could also mean that I'll have nothing until such time as I'm ready, and then when I'm ready, I'm going to place all of my chips on the table and go all in. The problem with those examples is that rather than play the game of life for consistency, longevity, and compounded interest, which is to say that we are moderate and yet progressive with action, which yields continuous results, we have instead developed this all or nothing jackpot style mentality that is looking for the big hit, the mother lode, the one-time bonanza, and thus, with short-sightedness, we invest everything that we've got into that one thing, that one event, that one person, that one gamble, fantasizing and hoping that it will pay off. And that is a very risky approach, a very hit or miss approach that more than often leads to a miss. Furthermore, when approaching the game of life with an all or nothing mentality, we get stuck in a boom and bust cycle of having it all and then having nothing at all, where there are periods of intense excitement and elation followed by slumps of disappointment and despair. We can go from being full of life, getting stuff done and flowing through life with ease and variety, and then find ourselves stuck in a rut, not getting any action, going through the same dreary motions, wondering, when will this part of my life ever get better again? And why? Why do we keep finding ourselves riding high then crashing low? It's because we are both the victor and victim of the Devious dozen archetypes. We are either rushing into life or running away from life because of our drives and desires. We are either motivated or demotivated because of our drives and desires. We are either winning or losing because of our drives and desires. Our drives and desires are taking us closer to the things that we want, or they're taking us further away from them. And the cause and effect of how each archetype does this will become apparent when you study their individual profiles. So don't worry if this is not quite making sense just yet. For now, all we need to know is this: the all or nothing mentality makes for the unstable and inconsistent life. When playing a game of lifestyle roulette and placing everything that you are and have on one way, one person, whatever that one thing might be for you, you will rarely win, but mostly lose. That's because, again, life is about balance, about hedging and spreading your bets across all aspects of life that are needed to secure your needs. To focus on just one aspect of life and neglect the others is to play a losing game. You need to make sound investments that safeguard all aspects of life. You need to maintain health and stability in your psychology, physicality, relationships, career, recreation, and finances, etc. In terms of instant gratification, to extort from the bank of today without making the investments for tomorrow is also to play a losing game. We lose tomorrow when we find that we have not safeguarded our future health and security. That's because where there is excessive desire for the consumption and accumulation of external values, this will result in the karmic debt of a dysfunctional, depleted, and degenerate mind body, where one is with ill thinking and ill feeling more often than not. And this will result in poor finances, poor possessions, and poor circumstances. Excessive desire will always lead to constant despair. Despair is to be with a sense of loss and of lost hope, and that things will always be bad and never get better. Despair is the result of reflecting back on what once was, and then realizing that what happened back then is the result of what's going wrong today. It is when we are left dealing with the aftermath, the consequences of living a part of our life that has gone from being triumphant to tragic, where one is left reeling with the internalized pains of that tragedy. Therefore, to summarize, the Devious dozen can be the reason that we violate true nature, violate balance, go to extremities, win occasionally but lose more often than not. They are the reason that we can win today but lose tomorrow. And if we don't reflect upon our behaviors more often than not to determine where we are getting it wrong, where we are self-abusive and self-sabotaging, then we can never make the necessary adjustments to correct, stabilize, balance, and then enhance who we be and what we do. And you'll be pleased to know that's exactly what you'll be doing in this program. You'll be reflecting back on where things went wrong And then you will be making sound investments in your future to cultivate a future self, a future security, place sometime in the future that you would be pleased to arrive at. But before we get into the highs, we need to continue discussing the lows. That's because the Devious dozen archetypes that you are soon to learn about and master can be the reason that we hit rock bottom. Some of us, at some point and some situation in our life, have experienced that hard and desolate place known as the rock bottom. The rock bottom is the resting place for broken dreams and shattered ideals, where one is left dealing with a psychological meltdown and is feeling fatigued and demoralized by a certain aspect of their life. Rock bottom is the end game of a particular situation or an entire life that's troubled with broken thoughts, ugly emotions, and poor results. Rock bottom is a psychological hellhole that arrives without warning. Psychologically speaking, the mind starts to come undone with its unresolved bad karma. Rock bottom is when a certain part of your life has become intolerable, unbearable, and untenable. Rock bottom is when you just can't go on as you are, doing that thing in that situation or with that person anymore. It is when you've reached a point of ultimate anguish. It's a feeling of being stuck within this inescapable nightmare and enduring the acupunctures of suffering. We all, to some degree, experience suffering. We can suffer because we are experiencing poor treatment and bad life conditions. We can suffer because of the wretchedness of our own existence. Suffer because of who we are and what we've done in one particular situation, or many. And if we are completely honest with ourselves, there are, or there have been, certain aspects of our life that each time we think about them, we squirm with self-disgust for all those false, weak, unworthy, and grotesque ways that we have self-compromised and done wrong to others. We can start to feel disappointed and feel like a failure for not being able to act with more loyalty, virtue, and dignity towards yours truly and those we care for. Sometimes, at the lowest ebb of despair, one does weep in private. What have I become? Each time we do relive the nostalgic tortures of a dishonourable past, that despair is almost always accompanied with the twin sister of pity. There is deep regret and sympathy as we desperately yearn for things to have been somehow different. We may even ache to be someone better and may desire to somehow turn things around and make them better, and yet without knowing why we engage with self-sabotaging and self-abusive behaviours that lead to our demise, we cannot even begin to implement the corrections needed to mend the errors of our ways. Until now. Until now, with the strategies and methods and skills that you are going to master in this program to radically upgrade your psychology and life. So let's wrap up this presentation on the Devious Dozen with a summary. So far, you have learned that there are 12 archetypes, these 12 unique characteristic traits that direct your behavior with powerful drives and desires. That, when unrestrained, these archetypes are the reason that you engage with self-sabotaging and self-abusive behaviors. They will deliberately restrict and regress you backwards from breaking free of your negative and limiting habits. They will destroy, damage, obstruct, and scupper any opportunities and possibilities for you to expand beyond who you are and what you do right now. The Devious Dozen are self-abusive traits. They will have you engaging with behaviours that are harmful, belittling, degenerative, rude, vulgar, cruel, sadistic, heartless, and unkind to yourself and others. They are lower self traits that are degrading and demeaning to who you are. They don't help you with love, respect, and care. They hinder you with loathing, contempt, and neglect for the self. And the reason these 12 archetypes wield that kind of damaging power over you is because they rely upon your self-unawareness. Think of the Devious Dozen as covert mind predators that prey upon selfishness, shallowness, and ignorance. And I don't mean that in a nasty way. You see, I speak from experience. I have been part of their detrimental clique. The self-sabotaging and abusive ways of these archetypes, they have got you long before you wake up to the fact they're even there. They are undercover agents of mind control that operate by unconscious stealth to subvert your mind. They rely upon your self-unawareness to satisfy their sinful intentions. Without you knowing, the Devious Dozen traits have complete unconscious sovereignty over your mental faculties. From the realms of unconsciousness, from the shadows of your mind, they are pulling your strings. So if you have grown tired of any anxiety and anguish that troubles you, if you feel sick of the negative ways that you compromise yourself, if you have become disgruntled at making the same mistakes over and over, if you are fed up with not being able to get the things that you truly desire, if you want to take full control of your mind and start rising upwards and onwards towards the most ideal life that you can possibly think of, then you need to become aware of and then resolve the underlying psychological issues of the Devious Dozen. Which brings me nicely onto this quote here. What's left in the unconscious becomes fate. What's left unresolved in the unconscious becomes bad luck. The first quote means this: what we say is fate is actually a development of situational events that beyond our awareness are being orchestrated by our unconscious traits. In other words, nothing happens by fate. It happens by the unconscious programming of our mind-body. We just happen to be unaware of it. And it is the Devious Dozen archetypes, those unconscious traits, that predetermines your life. They predetermine what you will think, where you will go, what you will do, who you will meet, and what you will experience. The second quote means what's left psychologically unresolved becomes bad luck. That's because the negative aspects of the Devious Dozen archetypes, with their underlying fears, insecurities, traumas and shames, will always lead to self-sabotaging and self-abusive behaviours that will always keep you in the cycle of reliving the same bad karma, the same negative consequences, the same fate, the same bad luck, until that is that you resolve your psychology and break those patterns. So that's it. And look, I appreciate this information has been a lot to take in. We have discussed a lot of different topics here. I've gone deep and I've gone wide, and you have only just been introduced to the concept of archetypes, and no doubt you'll be a little bit confused, unsure, and probably eager to learn more. But please don't worry if this is not making absolute sense so far. Please do not fret if you are struggling to understand a few things. I will be repeating the same concepts all throughout this program, and on purpose, so that it does eventually make sense. And furthermore, as you study the individual profiles of the Devious dozen, as you are about to do, everything that I've stated in this tutorial will start to click into place. Also, do go back over this presentation, as it will reinforce the learning, and new things will jump out from the tutorial, and things will begin to make a lot more sense. Finally, where do you go from here? Start first with studying the Devious dozen archetypes. There are 12 tutorial videos to watch where I will give you a comprehensive breakdown and analysis of the characteristic traits of the different archetypes, where you will become more self-knowledgeable and self-aware of how they relate to your life and how their drives and desires affect your behaviour. Once you have studied the profiles, your next step is then to play the resolution game. The resolution game is a strategy with a 5-stage procedure of resolving the Devious dozen archetypes so that they are no longer having a self-sabotaging and self-abusive stranglehold over your life. And so once you have fully reflected upon and fully understood the content of this presentation, immediately get started on the study of the archetypal profiles, where the first tutorial will be the study of the fantasist archetype.